My husband smirked when I lost everything. He told me failure wasn't just mine, it was in my blood. What he never realized was that I had already secured a hidden fortune, quietly selling a patent for $112 million. When he walked out with someone younger, I let him take it all. Months later, when the truth surfaced, he and his lawyer were left speechless. Failure is in your blood. That was the line Adrian delivered. 3 months before, he abandoned me for Clara. That moment wasn't shocking because of the words themselves, but because it was the first time he'd said aloud what I'd suspected he'd believed all along. That morning is etched into me. I stood in the kitchen of our glass-walled penthouse, silk robe tied loosely, as I reviewed quarterly reports from my research division at Vera Pharmaceuticals. Adrian, polished as ever in his designer suit, sat before 3 glowing monitors, tracking markets like a man possessed. The Boston Harbor stretched wide behind him, a backdrop for the performance we repeated every dawn. I made the espresso at exactly 6:30 a.m., and he reminded me, without saying it, that love had long been replaced by routine. He looked up from his screens when I mentioned the funding cuts. Some people rise above market conditions, he said flatly. Others get swept away. That's just genetics. Then he turned back to his monitors, dismissing me with the flick of his eyes. My career, 8 years of work, reduced to bad DNA. And the truth, I wasn't surprised. That was just Adrian. He measured life in returns, margins, and numbers, as if human worth were a line item on a spreadsheet. What he never knew was that 3 years earlier, while he slept off another champagne-soaked celebration, I had been awake in my home office, perfecting something that would change everything. It began with my grandmother's small inheritance, a mere $40,000, and a note written in shaky handwriting. For your freedom, not for any man. With that seed money, I kept alive a patent I had filed years before, under my maiden name, Isabella Leone, a breakthrough algorithm, a secret no one, especially Adrian, could ever claim. That was when I began slipping away from these soirees, into quiet corners, onto my phone, checking the encrypted emails that hinted at a very different future. The companies didn't yet know who Isabella Leone was, but they knew her algorithm could alter the entire pharmaceutical industry. The negotiations were cautious, deliberate, but I could feel it building like static before a storm. And the storm came sooner than I expected. It was a Tuesday night in October when Marcus dropped by for drinks in our carefully curated penthouse, describing the firm's newest recruit. I saw Adrian lean forward with an intensity I hadn't witnessed since the first days of our marriage. "Clara Ashford," Marcus said, swirling his whiskey. "Harvard MBA, top of her class. She's got that hunger, the kind that makes you certain she'll either make partner in 5 years or die trying." Adrian's eyes lit up. "When does she start?" The way he repeated her name, Clara Ashford, wasn't casual, it was indulgent. Like he was savoring something forbidden and deciding he liked the taste. A chill ran through me. It wasn't the mention of a younger woman that unsettled me. He'd mentored plenty before. It was the hunger in his voice, the excitement, the certainty that this new protégé belonged to a future where I had no place. That night, he paced our living room, gesturing with his hands, alive with an energy he hadn't shown for years. "The firm needs people who understand modern markets," he declared. Then, turning to me, his tone shifted. Not the language of molecular structures. I tried to brush it off lightly, but the look he gave me, half pity, half disappointment, made it clear I was the wife who had been good enough for the climb, but not for the view from the top. A starter wife, disposable. That night, I lay in our king-sized bed, listening to Adrian's steady, oblivious breathing. And I made a decision. The negotiations on my patent would no longer move cautiously. But as I stared at the ceiling that night, the shadows on the plaster seemed to move like tides. For the first time, I wondered if I was clinging to a fantasy, if this patent, this secret life I'd built in quiet, was just another way to avoid facing my own failure. My grandmother's note, "For your freedom, not for any man," sat folded in the drawer of my nightstand. I took it out and read the fading ink until my eyes blurred. Freedom. What if I had misunderstood her? What if freedom didn't mean building something in secret, but letting go entirely? The weight of invisibility pressed on me. Adrian had been making me disappear for years, at dinners, at galas, in the quiet spaces between us. And I had gone along with it, shrinking to fit the shape of his ambition. What if I had already become the woman he believed I was? Powerless, disposable, irrelevant. The thought made my chest tighten. I imagined selling the patent for a fraction of its worth, taking a job far below my training, fading into the background of someone else's life. No more battles, no more pretense, just survival. I lay there, listening to his breathing, trying to picture that version of myself, but something in me rebelled, a thin, stubborn pulse of defiance, like the heartbeat of an idea I couldn't kill. The algorithm was real, the interest was real, and I was real. By dawn, the fear had cooled into clarity. This wasn't just about money or revenge, it was about not disappearing. It was about refusing to be written out of my own life. And that was when my decision hardened into steel. They would accelerate. The algorithm was complete. The market was hungry. 3 companies were already circling, and I could almost hear my grandmother's voice, reminding me why I'd kept this secret alive. For your freedom, not for any man. Only now did I realize what she truly meant. Freedom might not come from building with him. It might come from walking away entirely. Tuesday morning began like every other. Coffee at 6:30, emails by 7, in the lab by 8. At 9:47, my computer pinged with an email whose subject line felt both bland and ominous. Organizational update, action required. Corporate doublespeak filled 3 paragraphs, but the knife came in the final sentence. Effective immediately, the molecular research division is eliminated. 8 years of my life erased in a single line. My team, my research into genetic markers for early detection, my purpose, all deemed non-essential by executives who probably thought DNA was a stock ticker. Security arrived within 20 minutes, silent but watchful as I packed my career into a cardboard box. My hands shook as I wrapped my MIT graduation photo in tissue. Carl, the guard who had greeted me every morning for 5 years, couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Dr. Leone." Orders from corporate. His voice was soft, apologetic. My throat closed around the reply I wanted to give. Instead, I kept folding pieces of my life into a box designed for office supplies. The mug from my team that read "World's okay, boss" felt heavier than the rest. When my phone buzzed, it was Adrian. I typed, "Just got terminated. Mass layoffs." My fingers hovered, desperate to add more, desperate for comfort. His response came in 30 seconds. "We'll discuss tonight." 4 words, cold, clinical, stripped of empathy. They read like an agenda line item. That was all my 8 years were worth. The walk to my car was endless, I sat in my Honda for an hour, unable to turn the key. Recruiters called twice, circling already, like vultures before the body cooled. I let them go to voicemail. When I finally returned home, Adrian was in our bedroom, adjusting cufflinks worth more than my car. His Hermes tie gleamed under the light. He caught my reflection in the mirror, red eyes, wrinkled blouse, the termination papers still in my hands. "Thornton client dinner," he said. "Japanese executives can't reschedule." I stood frozen in the doorway, waiting for him to turn and actually see me. When he finally did, his only expression was mild irritation, as though my devastation had inconveniently collided with his calendar. "So," he said, straightening his collar, Vera finally pulled the trigger. "You knew." The words came out strangled. Everyone knew. Biotech's been hemorrhaging for months. Your department was always first on the chopping block. High overhead, minimal revenue generation. He spoke with the detachment of an analyst discussing a failed investment. But this wasn't a failed investment. This was my life's work. 8 years, Adrian, I whispered. I gave them 8 years. Adrian sighed, the sigh I had come to know too well. The one that told me I was being emotional about something he believed was purely logical. Then he crossed the room, placed his hands on my shoulders, and delivered the verdict of my life as if he were reading numbers off a spreadsheet. "Some people are built for success," he continued, still holding me in that mockingly tender grip. "Others can work their whole lives and never break through. There's no shame in accepting your limitations." He pressed a kiss to my forehead, a dismissal dressed as affection, then returned to his cufflinks as if the conversation had been about nothing more than dinner plans. 2 nights later, I understood exactly how he intended to frame my new unemployed status. Adrian gathered 8 colleagues in our dining room, one of his impromptu showcases of our perfect life. I spent 3 hours preparing Chilean sea bass with saffron reduction, chosen carefully from one of his approved cookbooks. When Marcus, ever the loyal sidekick, asked with a smirk, "Where's the brilliant scientist tonight?" Adrian answered smoothly, before I could open my mouth, "Isabella's between opportunities." The phrase rolled off his tongue like a diagnosis, final, incurable. I tried to counter, "Actually, I'm exploring several options." But Adrian sliced me off mid-sentence. "She's reassessing her career trajectory," he said, smiling at his colleagues as if he had just delivered timeless wisdom. The men nodded solemnly, mistaking my reduction to a cautionary tale for insight. I stood there holding a tray of canapés I'd arranged with meticulous care, invisible except as evidence of domestic utility. When James, a new associate, asked politely about my research, I began. "Genetic markers for early cancer detection." Adrian waved a hand. "Very technical, not dinner conversation." "Isabella, could you check the main course?" Through the serving window, I watched him hold court, animated, confident, gesturing toward the kitchen whenever he needed, to remind them that I was adjusting to my new reality. That night, when the guests had gone and Adrian lay sleeping in our king bed, satisfied with his performance as the magnanimous husband, I locked myself in the guest bathroom with my phone. But before I whispered into the phone, I spent 3 nights researching shell companies and inheritance structures. I pored over corporate law forums and biotech acquisition case studies, learning how patents like mine had been hidden before. I used an old MIT alumni contact to schedule a meeting with a consultant. No names, just an exploratory inquiry. He met me in a hotel lobby and spoke in cautious hypotheticals. "It's not illegal," he said, "but it's high stakes. And if your husband suspects a windfall, he'll come for it. They always do." I thanked him, paid in cash, and left through a side entrance. The anxiety clung to me the rest of the night, but it also steeled my resolve. If I moved forward, I had to do it perfectly, invisibly. The marble countertop was icy beneath me as I whispered into the receiver. "Dr. Leone, your algorithm could revolutionize our entire system," the representative from Helix Dynamics said. "We're prepared to make a substantial offer. But we need absolute confidentiality." "The patent is under my maiden name," I whispered, paranoia prickling. "This cannot be traced back to my marriage." "Understood. Can we meet in person?" I looked at my calendar. Empty, except for the humiliations Adrian expected me to endure. Thursday, 10 a.m., Starbucks on Massachusetts Avenue. Not near the financial district. From then on, my days were split in two. The life Adrian believed I lived, jobless, diminished, shrinking, and the life I built in secret. Late-night calls whispered from closets and bathrooms. Encrypted emails traded like contraband. Meetings disguised as coffee breaks. I felt like a spy in enemy territory. And the enemy slept in Egyptian cotton sheets in the next room. Thursday's meeting went better than I could have scripted. The Helix rep was younger than I expected. Early 30s, sharp and impatient. She opened with a figure that sounded generous, but I recognized the undercut. "That valuation assumes minimal commercial application," I said evenly, sliding a folder across the table. "The latest simulation results suggest otherwise." She frowned, glanced at the graphs. "That changes the model significantly." There was a pause. She leaned forward, whispering now. "We're prepared to go higher. But if your identity leaks during due diligence—" "It won't," I said. "I've secured legal protections. The patent structure is clean. No one can trace it back to me unless I allow it." She watched me for a long moment, calculating. Then she nodded. "We'll send updated terms by end of day." The Helix representative left with stars in his eyes, and I walked out knowing an offer was imminent. For the first time since the layoff, hope felt tangible. But hope, in my world, never lasted long. Exactly 9 hours later, I met Clara Ashford. The spring gala at the Mandarin Oriental was dressed up as charity, but everyone knew it was just another peacock parade for Boston's elite. I wore the black Versace dress Adrian had bought me 2 years earlier, back when he still needed me to look like an asset. He'd been distracted all week, glued to his phone, rearranging his schedule around someone else's. And then she appeared, Clara Ashford. She didn't just walk into the room, she owned it. Red Carolina Herrera gown, hugging her like it had been sculpted for her. Diamond studs flashing with every turn of her head, confidence radiating like heat. Her path through the crowd was deliberate, unstoppable, and when she saw us, her trajectory became a straight line. "You must be Isabella." Her handshake was firm, her smile polished to perfection. "Adrian talks about you constantly." The way she stretched constantly made it sound less like admiration and more like a warning. Her eyes flicked over me with the precision of someone appraising assets and liabilities. Mid-30s, unemployed, wearing a dress 1 season too old. Threat level, minimal. "Clara Ashford," she introduced herself, though of course I already knew who she was. "I'm the new analyst Adrian's been mentoring. He's been transformative for my understanding of emerging markets. Then she launched into a monologue about Asian volatility with the fervor I once reserved for RNA transcription. Adrian watched her with undisguised fascination, adding little insights that made her laugh, a laugh that hovered between professional and intimate. I stood beside them, champagne sweating in my hand, reduced to furniture with thoughts. When someone asked about her background, she dropped it casually. Harvard MBA, class of 2022. But her real education, she said with a sly smile, came from working with Adrian. He sees patterns others miss. My husband all but glowed under her praise. His posture shifted, shoulders back, chin lifted, the posture of a man closing a deal he desperately wanted. When another colleague joined the circle, Adrian's hand brushed the small of Clara's back, guiding her forward. The gesture was fleeting, but the way she leaned into it told me everything. The next 2 weeks turned his LinkedIn into a shrine to mentorship. Photos of their working lunches at restaurants I had never stepped into. Adrian and Clara bent over laptops at Mistral, their heads nearly touching, raising glasses at the Harbor Club, celebrating acquisitions. Their body language wasn't staged. It was a language all its own. The touch of her hand on his sleeve, the way he leaned toward her every time she spoke. The kind of intimacy people pretend not to see. Her comments came fast and effusive. Fire emojis, lines like, "This is why you're the best in Boston," and "lucky to learn from the master." Meanwhile, my texts asking if he'd be home for dinner went unanswered for hours. And when replies came, they were clipped. "Running late," "client emergency," "don't wait up." I started checking her Instagram compulsively, curated glimpses of her glossy life. Equinox at dawn, meetings in glass towers by noon, cocktails in velvet lounges by night. Adrian appeared more and more in her stories, always professional enough and to deny scandal, but intimate enough to make me choke on my own denial. And then came April 15th, the night the last illusion broke. Adrian had actually been home for dinner, a rare event. But when his phone buzzed at 10:45, his face tightened with mock concern. "Tokyo markets," he muttered, already reaching for his jacket. "You're right, we need to address this immediately. I'll meet you at the office." He kissed my forehead absently, tossed out the words "crisis" with the Yamamoto account, and disappeared into the night. At 2 a.m., wide awake and trembling, I called his office line. No answer. His cell went straight to voicemail. Then I remembered the location-sharing app we'd enabled years earlier in Europe. Never disabled, because we'd never imagined needing to. My hands shook as I opened it. The pin glowed at the Ritz-Carlton, not his office. My stomach hollowed. I switched to Clara's Instagram. An hour-old story, a champagne glass raised against Boston's skyline, tagged at the Ritz, captioned, "Late-night strategy session," with champagne and sparkle emojis. I sat on our bathroom floor until dawn, phone clutched in my hands, watching his location remain fixed in that hotel suite. At 6 a.m., Adrian walked in, shirt untucked, exhausted but oddly exhilarated. "Long night?" I asked from the kitchen, nursing cold coffee. "Exhausting," he said, without looking at me. "But we saved the account." And he disappeared into the shower. Saturday morning, my mother appeared at my door unannounced. Maria Leone had a sixth sense for her daughter's misery. One look at my hollow cheeks, the dark circles carved under my eyes, and she pulled me into a hug that collapsed years. For a moment, I was 15 again, small in her arms. On the couch, she asked only 2 words, "Tell me." So I did, about Clara, about the lunches, the late nights, the way Adrian looked at her like she was the answer to questions he hadn't even known he was asking. Mom listened quietly, fingers tightening on mine whenever my voice cracked. When I finished, she stroked my hand and said, "Some men only see your value once it's gone. Your father was the same with his first wife. He didn't understand what he had until she built a life without him." "This is different," I protested. "Adrian and I, we built something together." Her reply was calm, certain. "You built something. He just lived in it." She brushed my hair back the way she did when I was a child. "What are you going to do?" For a heartbeat, I almost told her about the algorithm, about the meetings whispered into bathroom mirrors, about the offers that would soon make Adrian's fortune look like pocket change. But something inside me hardened. This secret was too powerful, too essential to share, not even with the woman who loved me most. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm working on something." Her eyes narrowed with recognition. She had seen that look before, the one I carried when I fought my way into biotech despite everyone saying it was unstable. She smiled faintly. "Good. Whatever you're planning, make sure it's for you, not against him. The best revenge isn't vengeance. It's a life well lived." She stayed for lunch, filling the kitchen with the scent of her famous pasta sauce, her voice lifting the air with book club gossip and stories. After she left, silence reclaimed the penthouse. I stared at the harbor, my phone buzzing with another staggering offer from a biotech firm. The number should have thrilled me. Instead, it left me restless. That evening, Adrian came home earlier than he had in weeks. I should have known. His calm was too deliberate, his steps too measured, like a man rehearsing a performance. He settled into the leather chair he'd bought himself after making senior partner, framed perfectly against the harbor view, as though even our home was a stage. "Isabella, we need to have a conversation about our future." His voice was controlled, polished, practiced. I imagined him in his office, running the lines aloud, maybe even with Clara nearby, coaching him on how to handle the soon-to-be ex-wife. He clasped his hands, gazed steady, but never meeting my eyes. We've grown apart. The man I was 5 years ago needed something different than the man I am now. "You're brilliant, but our trajectories don't align anymore." He spoke for 20 minutes without once looking directly at me. His words were a blur of corporate euphemisms: natural evolution, strategic realignment, optimizing individual potential. When he finally mentioned Clara, it was clinical, careful. "She speaks the language of my world. Quarterly projections, merger strategies. She matches my pace. You've always been more comfortable in the lab." 5 years of marriage reduced to a failed performance review. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him about the algorithm that would transform medicine, about the money already circling me like satellites around a new sun. Instead, I stayed silent, letting him think he was the strategist in control. When he finally paused, I asked evenly, "When?" "I think it's best we move quickly," he said. "Cleaner for everyone involved." The next morning, at exactly 8 a.m., the doorbell rang. Harrison Whitfield stood there like an executioner in Armani, briefcase in hand. Inside were documents drafted long before Adrian's little performance the night before. Every detail considered, every asset catalogued, every clause crafted to appear generous, while ensuring Adrian kept everything of value. "Mrs. Leone," Harrison Whitfield said, smiling with lips that never touched his eyes, I'm here to discuss the dissolution paperwork. Mr. Leone has instructed me to be as generous as possible given your current employment situation." The way he lingered on current told me everything. Adrian had clearly briefed him in detail, calculating how my termination made me weaker, easier to corner. Whitfield spread the papers across our dining table, the same table where Adrian and I had once celebrated anniversaries, hosted colleagues, sketched out futures we no longer shared. "The terms are quite favorable," he explained, manicured finger tracing neat lines of legal text. Adrian would retain the penthouse as his income serviced the mortgage, the Porsche since the lease bore his name, the investment accounts since his bonuses funded them. I would keep my 9-year-old Honda, my clothing, my jewelry, my personal belongings. 5 years of marriage reduced to whatever I could fit in a trunk. Whitfield's faint smile suggested I should be grateful Adrian wasn't demanding spousal support from his unemployed wife. "I'll need to review this with my attorney," I said evenly. "Of course," Whitfield replied smoothly. "But Mr. Leone's offer is contingent on expeditious resolution. Prolonged negotiations would necessitate a less generous arrangement." Margaret Alonquo's office overlooked Boston Common, its corner suite wrapped in glass. She had built her career dismantling men who confused their net worth with their actual worth. She listened as I explained, her pen scratching elegant loops across the page like calligraphy. "Standard high-net-worth divorce tactics," she said at last. "He wants you to feel grateful for crumbs while he keeps the bakery." She examined Whitfield's documents like they were live explosives. "The terms are reasonable, given Massachusetts law and your current finances," she concluded. "I want to accept them," I said. Her head snapped up, surprise flashing across her face. "But with one modification. I want an absolute mutual release clause. No future claims, no exceptions, no matter what happens." Her pen froze midair. "That's unusually comprehensive. If you inherited money, won the lottery, or came into a windfall, he couldn't touch it. But the reverse is true. If he doubles his income, if he makes partner, you get nothing." "Perfect," I said. "Make it ironclad." Margaret tapped her fingers, her mind already turning. "You're planning something." "I'm planning to move forward," I replied. "This ensures we both do so completely." She studied me a moment longer, then nodded. "I'll draft language that no court could overturn. But Isabella, once you sign this, that's it. No second chances." "I understand." 3 days later, in Whitfield's conference room, a space staged with dark wood and leather to intimidate, I sat across from Adrian. He wore his lucky deal-closing suit, smug in the certainty of a man who believed he had already won. The faint trace of Clara's perfume clung to him like a trophy. Whitfield slid the agreement forward. "This release clause is unusually comprehensive, Mr. Leone." "Are you certain?" Adrian barely skimmed it. To him, I was already irrelevant. A failed scientist with no assets, no future. If it expedites the process, I'm fine with it. He signed with a flourish, like closing one more brilliant deal. I thought of the email glowing in my phone from Helix Dynamics, an offer that exceeded even my wildest calculations. My hand was steady as I signed. "Congratulations," Whitfield intoned. "You are now officially divorced." Adrian rose, adjusted his cuffs, and gave me one final look. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Isabella." I almost laughed. I had already found it. He just didn't know yet. I walked out with papers in my hand and freedom in my lungs. The elevator ride down from the 40th floor felt like descending through layers of skin, shedding one life to step raw into another. By the time I reached the parking garage, I was already scrolling through apartment listings. The performance of starting over had to begin immediately. The brownstone in Cambridge was perfect. Second floor, 3 stories high, tucked on a tree-lined street just off Massachusetts Avenue. Professors and grad students filled the sidewalks, carrying books and arguments. Below my unit, a used bookstore sold coffee that was terrible but comforting, better somehow than anything the gleaming machines in the penthouse had ever produced. The apartment itself was small, 1 bedroom, a living room that doubled as dining space, and a kitchen where 2 people would have to choreograph their movements. The radiators banged at night, the windows rattled when trucks roared by, but the exposed brick and creaking hardwood whispered history. It felt real, alive. I paid Mrs. Chin, the landlord, 3 months up front in cash. Recently divorced, rebuilding, I told her. She patted my hand knowingly. You'll see, she said, freedom tastes better than security ever did. My old Honda fit right in, parked at the curb. I left it visible, always returning it to the same spot, letting it play its role in the story. Divorced woman, limited means, surviving on scraps her ex-husband left behind. The groceries I carried upstairs came from Whole Foods bags stuffed with instant noodles, generic cereal, and cheap screw-top wine. Anyone watching, and I knew someone was, would see exactly what they expected. What they wouldn't see were the documents I'd signed that very morning in Margaret's office. The transfer of $112 million, hidden behind a lattice of trusts and shell companies. Money rendered invisible, waiting until I decided to set it free. I crafted a routine that was deliberately public. Every morning at 8:30, I walked to the Daily Grind, a cafe 3 blocks from MIT where biotech recruiters liked to hold casual meetings. I claimed the same corner table, fanned out resumes, and highlighted job postings with colored pens I'd bought specifically for the role. Another interview? Kevin, the grad student behind the counter, would ask. 3rd this week, I'd sigh, feigning exhaustion. The market's brutal right now. I took real phone interviews I never planned to accept, my voice carrying just enough for eavesdroppers. I downplayed salary expectations, gushed over entry-level positions beneath my qualifications, thanked recruiters profusely for considering me despite the gap. Twice, I spotted familiar faces from Adrian's circle, their sympathetic smiles promising gossip about poor Isabella, trying to rebuild after her husband traded her in for a newer model. Meanwhile, James Yoshida called only on encrypted lines, only at prearranged times. The secondary transfers are complete, he'd say, his voice clipped even through layers of security. The trust structure is operational, the paper trail non-existent. On paper, I was living off savings and desperation. In truth, I was richer than Adrian would ever dream. 3 weeks into this performance, on a Thursday evening when rain turned the streets into rivers, there was a knock at my door. Patricia Leone, Adrian's mother. She stood in the hallway clutching a covered casserole, her smile lined with sorrow that had clearly been rehearsed for days. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said softly. But we both knew she wouldn't have come if she thought I'd turn her away. I stepped aside and let her in. Her eyes swept over the mismatched furniture I'd gathered from estate sales, the modest apartment that screamed downgrade. Compared to the penthouse where she'd toasted holidays, this place was a stage set for failure, exactly as I intended. Patricia set the casserole down on my tiny counter and pulled me into a hug that lasted long enough for both of us to pretend we weren't crying. We sat at my small kitchen table, bought secondhand from a grad student leaving for Mumbai, sipping tea from mismatched mugs while rain lashed the windows. Patricia looked older than I remembered, new lines etched around her eyes, a faint tremor in her hands that hadn't been there before. "I knew about her," she said suddenly. "Clara, I knew before you did." I stayed silent, letting her unload the guilt. She described the lunch at the club, the way Clara touched Adrian's arm, the way he leaned toward her with a laugh that was too bright, too eager. Patricia stared into her tea. "It's not your fault," I told her honestly. "Adrian made his choices." Her gaze swept the apartment again. "I'm fine," I assured her. "Really, I've got interviews lined up. My savings will last a while." She wanted to believe me, needed to believe her son hadn't destroyed me entirely. I let her. It was the least I could give her. The next morning, I sat across from Thomas Hashimoto at the Four Seasons. He specialized in wealth management for what he called ultra-high net worth individuals. His conference table was covered with documents that looked less like contracts and more like a feast. "Ms. Leone," he greeted me, using the name that appeared on every trust document. "We need to discuss investment strategies for your assets." For 2 hours, we mapped out diversification across markets, offshore structures, accounts tucked away, in jurisdictions where privacy was law. Every document I signed bore the name Adrian had once told me to abandon because it was too ethnic for Boston society. Isabella Leone, now tied to more wealth than his firm would ever touch. "Your ex-husband," Hashimoto said carefully, "has no way to connect you to these assets." "He has no idea they exist," I replied, "and legally, even if he found out tomorrow, the mutual release clause makes it untouchable." He smiled. "Then we proceed as planned. Your fortune remains invisible until you decide otherwise." That evening, I stopped at the grocery store, filled a Whole Foods bag with instant noodles and screw-top wine, and carried it upstairs in plain sight. I left it on the counter beside a stack of bank statements I kept visible for visitors. The performance had to be perfect. 3 months into the divorce, my role as the struggling ex-wife was flawless. Tuesday morning, late July, I dressed in my one surviving designer suit, the navy Armani I'd saved for interviews, and took the tea instead of a car service. Every detail mattered. The Boston Biotech Summit pulsed with nervous energy. Scientists in rumpled suits chasing breakthroughs, corporate recruiters hunting talent, grad students desperate for a lifeline. I moved through it all, registered under Dr. Isabella Blackwood, collecting brochures and business cards I'd never use. The whispers began at noon. I was speaking with a recruiter from Genentech when her expression shifted. Her eyes flicked past me, landed again, and sharpened. "Excuse me," she asked casually, "did you say your maiden name was Leone?" The question was innocent on its face, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. Behind her, 2 executives from a rival firm whispered, their glances darting in my direction. "Yes," I answered smoothly. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, nothing," she said too quickly. "It's just, there's talk about a major acquisition. Some revolutionary patent in genetic sequencing. The seller's name was Leona, such an unusual coincidence." I smiled politely and shifted the conversation, but inside I knew it. The illusion had cracked. By mid-afternoon, the whispers at the conference had grown louder than the keynote speakers. Conversations halted when I approached, Heads leaned together after I passed. By 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed with 17 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. The ripples were spreading. That evening, in my Cambridge apartment, I scrolled through Instagram. Clara's story appeared, dripping with venom dressed as virtue. First, a screenshot of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office database, sections highlighted in neon. Her caption read, "Interesting how some people preach transparency in relationships while hiding major assets. The truth always surfaces. Number integrity matters number financial honesty." Next came screenshots of Massachusetts divorce law on asset disclosure. Then a picture of her and Adrian at dinner, supporting each other through deception and betrayal. And then, the most telling of all, a photo of the Helix Dynamics building, tagged only with 3 question marks. She was circling closer, her network in venture capital, feeding her rumors, piecing together the silhouette of a truth she couldn't quite prove. I could almost feel her frustration, knowing but not knowing enough. The next afternoon, while I performed my usual theater at the coffee shop, Marcus's name flashed across my screen. His call reeked of rehearsal, Adrian's fingerprints all over it. I stayed another hour in the coffee shop, pen circling job postings I didn't need, my hands steady even though my pulse was racing. The pieces were aligning exactly as I had predicted. The financial world was circling, still trapped in rumor, waiting for confirmation. That night, I opened my laptop and logged into the Marinay Biosystems email account, the one that had been silent since the first negotiations. It was time for the final move. "Dear Miss Patterson," I typed to the head of PR at Helix Dynamics. "As we discussed during our initial negotiations, I have maintained a low profile regarding the patent acquisition. However, I believe it may now be appropriate to update your press materials to reflect the full name of the patent holder for accuracy and transparency. Please update all references from DRV Marinay to Dr. Isabella Leone Blackwood. Thank you for your continued discretion in this matter. Best regards, Dr. Isabella Leone Blackwood." I hit send. Within hours, maybe less, the update would appear in Helix Dynamics press materials. Their next quarterly report would carry my full name. The rumor would crystallize into truth. Adrian's discarded wife, the failure in his story, revealed as the architect of the fortune he never saw coming. I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the flow of students and professors along Massachusetts Avenue. The summer evening light stretched across the street, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight shift. The game was no longer mine alone to play. Another Instagram notification buzzed across my phone. Clara again. Another desperate attempt to stitch together a story that was about to write itself. Tomorrow, maybe the next day, Adrian would finally understand the price of his arrogance. While he had been calculating my limitations, I had been building an empire he couldn't even fathom. The woman he branded a failure, whose genetics carried mediocrity, was sitting on a fortune that eclipsed his entire career. I thought of Patricia's sad eyes when she visited, of Marcus's clumsy fishing call, of every dinner party where I had been dismissed as the woman with test tubes while real men counted portfolios and profits. The truth was about to surface, and I felt calm. That calm shattered Thursday night when a storm swept through Cambridge. Rain streaked my windows, turning the city into a watercolor. I was reading a medical journal when my phone vibrated. Adrian's name lit the screen like prophecy. I let it ring 3 times before answering. His voice was unrecognizable, raw, uncertain, almost desperate. Isabella, the patent, the Helix Dynamics acquisition. It's you, isn't it? Isabella Leon Blackwood. The press release had gone live that morning. By noon, the blogs had picked it apart. By the afternoon, I knew Adrian had seen something. Marcus had liked a LinkedIn post from a biotech analyst quoting the press release. A junior partner at his firm reposted a tech blog with the headline, Helix Dynamics backs $112 million algorithm breakthrough by Dr. Isabella Leon Blackwood. His own name hadn't yet appeared in connection, but the timelines were close enough for anyone curious to connect dots. I imagined Adrian in his office, scrolling furiously, refreshing private equity news feeds, picking up his phone only to hang up again. Not yet ready to call, not yet ready to admit what he was seeing, but the walls were closing in, and I could feel it. By 3, the connection between the mysterious patent holder and Adrian's discarded wife was common knowledge. Yes, I said. The silence stretched, broken only by rain and his ragged breathing. 112 million, he whispered, each word separate, as if his brain couldn't make sense of the number. You had $112 million when we divorced. No, I corrected. I had a patent. The sale finalized 2 weeks after you signed. That's semantics. You knew what it was worth. You let me think you had nothing. I let you believe what you already believed, that my work would never amount to anything. This isn't fair, he snapped. We were married 5 years. That patent was developed during our marriage. I have rights. You have exactly what you negotiated for, I said evenly. The penthouse, the Porsche, the accounts, and a mutual release clause you signed without blinking. I could hear him pacing, doors opening and shutting, then muffled voices. Clara was with him. Of course. We need to talk in person, he said. It's nearly midnight. I don't care. The line went dead. The knock was hard. Not hesitant, demanding. I checked the peephole. Adrian, drenched from the rain, jaw tight, folder in hand. Clara stood behind him, mascara smudged, mouth set in a line so thin it looked surgical. I opened the door just enough to meet his eyes. Isabella, we need to talk. Not tonight. It's not a request. He stepped forward, but I didn't move. You show up uninvited at midnight and you think you still get to make demands? I know about the Helix acquisition, he snapped. I know it was you. And I know you hid it. This. He held up the folder, paper crinkling under his white-knuckled grip. Changes everything. It doesn't, I said quietly. It happened after the divorce. The release clause is binding. No judge will accept that once we prove fraud, Clara said, pushing forward now, rainwater flicking from her heels. Concealing a major asset during a divorce? That's perjury. We'll drag this through court, Isabella. We'll bury you in litigation. You have no proof I concealed anything. Not yet, Adrian said, but we have enough to raise flags. Enough to demand discovery. Enough to ruin your precious reputation, while we tie you up in depositions and subpoenas for the next 5 years. A car passed on the street below, headlights flashing through the rain. Inside my apartment, the air felt suddenly too thin. That sounds like a threat, I said. It's a strategy, Clara said coldly. Same as yours. I built that patent before we were married, I said. Filed under my maiden name, funded by my grandmother. And I finalized the deal after you signed the release clause. Legally, you have nothing. Morally, you're a liar, Adrian spat. You don't get to invoke morality, I said. stepping out into the hallway, letting the door click shut behind me. Not after everything. He opened the folder, flipping pages with trembling fingers. We're offering a clean resolution. 50% of the proceeds. In exchange, we drop everything. 50%? I almost laughed. You had everything. You signed it away. You don't get a redo because the numbers shocked you. Clara stepped closer now, her voice a whisper. This can go public, Isabella. People will start asking why you really left the firm, what you were really doing behind Adrian's back. You won't look like the wronged genius. You'll look like a manipulator who stole her husband's legacy. For the first time, my hand twitched toward the door. The old fear of being misunderstood, branded the villain, tried to rise. But I stayed still. You want to play reputation warfare? I said. Fine. But remember, I didn't publish the patent. Helix did. I didn't name myself in their release. They did. And the only thing tying you to me is a legally void contract you didn't bother to read. Adrian's mouth opened, then closed. Clara's voice turned shrill. We'll ruin you. I looked her dead in the eye. Then bring your ruin. But understand this. The moment you file, I countersue for harassment, for defamation, and for breach of post-divorce peace. Every email, every message, every midnight knock becomes evidence. Her eyes flickered. She hadn't expected resistance, not like this. I turned to Adrian. You chose Clara. You chose to underestimate me. You chose to walk away. Now live with it. Silence fell like a curtain. I loved you once, he said, voice quiet. No, I whispered. You loved having someone you could leave behind. I opened the door. They didn't move. You can stay out here, I said, or you can walk away. But this is where the story ends for you. I stepped back inside and closed the door, locked it. I stood there, back pressed against the wood, heart pounding like a war drum. And I smiled. Let them file, let them shout. I had already won. I closed the door. Their footsteps faded down the stairwell. From the window, I watched them slip into his Porsche. Clara gesturing wildly, Adrian sitting stiff, silent. Their red taillights bled into the rain until they vanished. In my small apartment, surrounded by mismatched furniture and the props of my supposed poverty, I felt nothing but peace. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, threats, and public theatrics. But tonight, I had won by refusing to apologize for protecting myself. The rain washed the city until dawn. I didn't sleep. Instead, I watched the storm ease into drizzle, then stop altogether. By morning, I had made a decision. The performance of poverty had served its purpose. It was time to stop hiding. 3 months later, in October, I held an invitation thick as armor. Helix Dynamics wanted me to present my algorithm to their board and key investors. That morning, I dressed in a charcoal suit, tailored to perfection. My Cambridge apartment was gone, traded for a Beacon Hill brownstone I'd moved into quietly on a Sunday when no one was watching. The Helix boardroom sat 40 floors up. Boston sprawled below like a chessboard. As executives filed in, I recognized faces from Adrian's firm. Richard Thornton, the managing partner who had once condescended to me at dinners. James Mitchell, who had laughed loudest at Adrian's jokes about my test tubes. And in the back, Marcus, feigning invisibility. Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO began, it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Isabella Leone, whose pioneering algorithm positions Helix Dynamics at the forefront of genetic medicine. I stood before them, not as the discarded wife, not as the unemployed scientist, but as the architect of the technology that would redefine disease detection and treatment. I watched Richard Thornton's face as realization set in, watched him calculating what $112 million meant for my net worth versus his. "Dr. Leone," he said carefully after my presentation, "this is remarkable work. I believe you were previously married to one of our senior partners?" "Previously," I confirmed, meeting his gaze, "though I'm sure Adrian has moved on to better things." The room fell into silence. Everyone knew the story now. The senior partner who had discarded his wife for a younger protégé, just weeks before her 9-figure fortune was revealed. 2 weeks later, at the Children's Hospital annual fundraiser, the Four Seasons Ballroom glittered with Boston's elite. My name gleamed in the program as a platinum sponsor, listed alongside families who had been philanthropists for generations. I saw them before they saw me, Adrian and Clara, standing stiff by the silent auction tables. His hand rested on her back, the same possessive gesture he had once used with me. Her engagement ring flashed under the chandeliers, smaller, far smaller than the one he'd given me years ago. He looked older now, grayer at the temples, shoulders hunched with the weight of what he'd lost, and I stood radiant, untouchable, the one who walked away with everything. The whispers followed them like smoke. Monumental misjudgment. Could have been set for life. She was worth how much? His colleagues barely nodded at him now, their greetings clipped, their attention already drifting toward more promising alliances. Our eyes met across the ballroom as a server placed a glass of champagne in my hand. For a moment, time slowed. Adrian took in the gown, the unforced confidence, the circle of admirers surrounding me as I explained the scholarship fund I had just announced. I raised my glass, not in mockery but in acknowledgement. We had both chosen and both lived with the consequences. He turned away first, steering Clara toward the exit. They slipped out before dinner was even served. A month later, my mother's 70th birthday filled my Beacon Hill brownstone with life. Unlike the sterile penthouse Adrian had once prized, this home breathed warmth, family photos on every wall, the scent of fresh pasta sauce in the kitchen, children laughing in the garden. When everyone gathered for dinner, I finally told them about the patent, the fortune, the secrecy. Some were stunned, some were even hurt that I hadn't shared sooner. But my mother only raised her glass with a proud smile. "My daughter," she said, who knew when to speak and when to stay silent, who built her success not on anyone else's foundation, but on her own. We toasted not just the money, but the legacy. I announced the Nana Marinée Scholarship Fund at MIT. 4 full fellowships for women pursuing graduate degrees in biotechnology. Freedom turned into opportunity, inheritance transformed into impact. That night, long after the dishes were cleared and the house quiet again, I sat in my study overlooking the Charles River. No sterile marble, no glass walls, just leather, old books, and peace. I picked up a sheet of my new stationery and began to write. "Adrian, you were right about one thing. We did speak different languages. Yours was about taking. Mine was about building. You measured success in acquisitions. I measured it in discoveries. You dismissed my work as test tubes and failures. I knew it was the future. The fortune you never saw was never about the money. It was about knowing my worth when you couldn't see it and never letting anyone else define it again. The best revenge isn't served cold. It's served with documentation, patience, and silence." I folded the letter, sealed it, and locked it in my desk. Some truths don't need to be delivered, they just need to exist. Outside, Boston glittered with its endless striving. But in my study, surrounded by the life I had built with precision and patience, I understood the only approval I'd ever needed was my own. Isabella's story isn't just about revenge, it's about reclaiming power in a world that tried to erase her. But not every betrayal ends this cleanly. Some lies still linger. Some exes don't stay gone. And for every Isabella, there's another woman planning her next move in silence.